The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Now broadcasting from the Right to Offend Media Studios in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, art, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report Live with Sam Whitfield.
But giving offense is good. In fact, it's essential.
Alrighty, good evening everyone and welcome to the Whitfield Report Wednesday edition. We're doing things a little different this week because just of the holidays and everyone's scheduling. I'm actually doing the pre-recorded show on Wednesday this week instead of Monday. In case you missed on Monday, I was on Eric P. Bishop's podcast, A Tale of Two Scribes, and coincidentally we never planned this, but it just kind of worked out this way. Eric is now here for his 5th appearance on the Whitfield Report. I actually did check that. So, Eric, welcome back. You are officially a regular now. You and Andrew Nelson.
All right.
Actually, so.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I expect that the 5th award plaque must be in the mail. You know, it's got to be on its way, right?
Yeah. That along with the 100,000, YouTuber plaque that, John's gonna hopefully give you a duplicate of once Spear Talk gets 100K subscribers.
He's getting close to 50,000 now, so he's really, John has done a tremendous job of building up the Spear Talk brand. So I think he's at 46, 47, I can't remember now, but getting close.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just want to thank you for having me on, your podcast a few, we recorded a few weeks ago, but it aired on Monday night, and the feedback I've gotten on it has just been tremendous already, so I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to come on. And with that being said, I also have gotten a lot of questions from people just in the last few hours, really, of how you got involved with Spear Talk, just in general. I know we've talked a little bit about A Tale of Two Scribes itself, but how'd you get involved with Spear Talk as a larger brand?
So the made-up fictional version is, well, this is true. John was Secret Service under, I believe, Obama, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And with John being Secret Service, he probably bumped into the body man in the West Wing at some point. So we were bound to work together. It just fate intertwined us. So that's the BS version of it. So the true version would be. Yeah. Would actually be a thank you to Jason Piccolo, Dr. Jason Piccolo. He had me on his Protectors podcast. John caught that at some point when The Body Man originally came out. And I just got, I don't know if it was March of 2022. I think so. Sometime around February or March of 2022. He just slid into my DMs on Instagram. Hey, man, I got a podcast. You want to come on it? And as you know, when you're trying to market books, when someone asks if you want to promote your book, your answer is pretty much always yes.
Yes.
So I was a guest on Spear Talk, and that's and just we started talking offline after the pod. We connected really well on the podcast, and we started talking offline after it, and that just kind of morphed into us. I came down to a Shinedown show. They came to Greenville, South Carolina, a couple months later, I think. So I met John backstage for that. He gave me and my son backstage passes. And we started working on some projects that I still can't really talk about officially. And in the course of doing all that, last year he was looking to expand kind of bring on other hosts and have other programs under the Spear Talk umbrella. And we started chatting about doing a show. He subsequently worked out with Eric Bass from Shinedown that they have a show as well. So we kind of took that brand and then started to, under John's leadership, started putting some other shows together. So that's the non-glamorous, non-fictionalized version of how I became a podcast host.
Well, to me, actually, it's funny enough, to me, that is glamorous as someone who's been doing podcasting for a long time, as you know.
Yeah.
I remember I actually talked to you possibly about doing a podcast. I remember floating the idea.
I think a while back. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I don't think a lot of people realize is doing post-production and even like live streaming is maybe not super hard, but it's a bit more challenging than people think it is. I remember that was one of your kind of hesitancies of, I think I would be a good interviewer, but as far as doing, post-production, that's not really in my wheelhouse. And whoever does the post-production on the show, I don't know if it's John or someone on his team, but they do a really good job of, putting the show together for you.
Yeah. So all that credit goes to Nando. Nando is someone that has worked with John for a while. He's helped design stuff, does a lot of multimedia type stuff, does design work for guitar picks and logos.
Yeah.
I believe he's in, I don't want to mess up which country he's in. He's in South America somewhere. Might be my head cold kicking in where I'm not retrieving that piece of data of where Nando. So Nando, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry. I can't remember where, maybe Brazil, maybe. I want to say maybe Brazil. But yeah, and that's something that, we did talk offline, and I was definitely interested in working with podcasts. But if time wasn't a factor, I probably wouldn't mind the post-production work and all that. But there's just too many moving pieces right now in my life. And I was like, I can't go film a podcast and spend hours working on everything you need to do to get it ready. So that was part of what made the opportunity with John so attractive, is that, hey man, you can bring on anyone you want. You can do whatever you want. You can film it however short or long, and then you just upload a file and I have someone that does the rest. So I have to do promotion for it, of course, but I'm already doing promotion anyways. So it's, it's not like it's tripling my time to do promotion or anything as well. So it was an easy fit, and it was something that allowed me to, continue on with other authors, bring on authors I like. I've had that question a lot of who do you decide to bring on? It's just, I bring on whoever I'm interested in talking to. It's really not a thing of trying to just bring on the biggest names I can pull or anything like that. If anything, I'm avoiding some of the bigger names just because I want to be able to give people a voice, and a lot of the big name people get on all the podcasts. And I understand why, because people want ratings and they want to be able to monetize a podcast or whatever. That's not my intent necessarily. I'd rather bring on people that interest me, and sometimes it's big name authors, and sometimes it's authors that might just sell, a handful of books. That's irrelevant to me.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, because this kind of leads into my next question is, so since you've been doing A Tale of Two Scribes, I believe it's been a year now, right? Or maybe a little more at this.
A little under. I think I started in March of this year. You were episode number 40, and there is a 41 for this year. So so basically all of about 9 to 10 months, I guess we've been doing it, thereabouts.
Yeah, still very good. I have to ask you, what have you learned, or have you learned anything from the authors that you've interviewed that you might not have expected about the author world? The reason I ask is I've also interviewed a lot of authors on the show. That's kind of my go-to now for guests, and part of the reason for that is authors are they're actually a lot more bookable compared to some other guests I've had where I've had to go through PR people or something like that, which I don't mind doing if it's a guest that I really think is good to get on, but it just adds like an extra layer that I I'd rather not have to deal with if I don't have to. But the upside of that is because I've talked to all these authors, I've gotten a viewpoint from, them on writing. And not everyone is like a hugely successful author. Some of them are just starting out. I've gotten a perspective on writing that has really kind of, in each interview I've done, you included, where I'm like, I hadn't thought of that before, or something like that. So have you had any experiences like that, or I guess what have you gotten out of hosting at Health to Scribes?
Yeah, so you end up getting little nuggets out of each interview. So it reinforced, I mean, I've learned a lot of things, yes. Specifically what it's reinforced to me is that everyone's journey is so different. I've talked to people that their first book out of the gate, was successful and they had an agent, they had a big publisher, boom. And then I've talked to people that literally, like my story is, it took them years to get anybody to say yes, or nobody said yes and they just had to self-publish. So it kind of just reinforced to me that there's no one way to get published. And there's no right way to get published either. That's the other thing that people need to keep in mind is that, I think we all get caught up and I do as well. So it's not pointing fingers. We get caught up in kind of the glitz and glamour of life now, that we have a lot of luxuries in life. So we see the shiny new pennies, we see the people that, man, they've made it. They become a New York Times bestseller. They've achieved whatever we think is the end all be all.
Yeah.
And then what you find out is that doesn't make, and I've said this in my own podcast, I spent the better part of 7 years trying to get published. And when I held that first book, when I opened it up, I bought my own copy, my publisher. I think it took 10 weeks for my publishing copies to show up after the book came out. So I didn't have any copies from the publisher. They mailed me one a couple months before the book came out and they sent it to the wrong address. So I never got it. So, I had moved or whatever. So that was a frustration. My first copy I held in my book, I bought from Amazon. I opened that up and I can still vaguely remember that feeling. Remember how powerful that feeling was.
Yeah.
Well, that fades with each release. And that fades even holding that book. The book that I held was right here, actually. It's still on the shelf. This was the first copy I ever held and touched. It's on the shelf now and I pick it up. It doesn't do that for me anymore. It's cool. I'm proud of it, but it's just part of my past.
Yeah. And it's funny because I remember you talking about that when you first, came on the show. And I was like, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
But, until I held my first copy of Shadows of Deception, which is also on a shelf somewhere, I had that immediate, feeling. And now, like, now it's kind of like my proof copy came. Well, that's good. I better check to just make sure that there are, no errors. But it's not
right.
It doesn't have the mystique that it once did.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, it's kind of a synopsis of what life is. You have all these big goals, and what you end up finding is if the goal is the end of what you want to achieve, you're probably going to be disappointed and let down.
Yeah.
And life's a journey, and publishing is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And again, some people buck that statement. Some people out of the gate get 7-figure, 8-figure deals, Hollywood, all the stuff. I've never gotten that, so I can't speak for them. But I tend to think, yes, there's probably a lot of joy that comes with that, but there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, especially if your first book sells really, really, really well. The publishing industry expects your second book to sell really, really, really well, and your third book.
Yeah.
And I know of an author, I haven't interacted with this person in years, but I knew a person years ago that they had a really well-received first book. Their second book didn't do so well. Third book, again, did even less than the second. And by the time their fourth book came around, they got dropped by the publisher. So I try to encourage people and tell people, well, they say, I'm starting off so small. It's like, that might be a blessing in disguise. Because if you can start off smaller and build your momentum, that's kind of makes better for a career, at least. But you have to look at it long term, and you have to find joy in the journey. You have to find a joy in the process. Because if you're If your only joy is coming from publishing a book, well, the book's going to come out. So what's after that? Is it the next book? Is it something completely different? You have to find. I just spent a week in Europe. It was completely enjoyable. Loved it. Traveled with my mom. Amazing experiences, great pictures, memories we make for a lifetime. I've been home for 2.5 days now. So kind of the lure of going around Ireland and walking through Edinburgh a couple nights, all that kind of fades. And then you're back to, 9-to-5 job. And I'm behind on my deadline for my next book. So, you got to be careful where you put your joy or emphasis in life, or you might be kind of a sad person.
Yeah, no. What I find interesting is everything that you're saying about the publishing world is almost, at least in my experience, kind of like could be directly translated into podcasting. I know several people who were once well-known podcasters who are younger than I am, who their podcast just boomed and took off overnight, and they were really focused on like this one niche topic or whatever, and then as soon as that niche, in popular culture or whatever it was at the time, politics, elections, once that faded, they stopped to, they basically cratered to where like, some of them weren't even getting like 100 downloads. It messed with a lot of them, whereas like, I've had my up moments and I've had my, down moments, but like one of the reasons why I've started interviewing so many authors is I'm in this world now partially, so that's it. But also, like, I don't want the Whitfield Report to necessarily be pigeonholed, which I think I don't want to toot my own horn, but like in the last couple of years, I think that's what has really allowed the show to succeed compared to the earlier years. So I always advise, podcasters starting out like, hey, if you get, a couple, 1,000 listeners in your first few years and you get monetized, that's really good. But don't think you're going to be the next Joe Rogan overnight because of your success right now. So
no, you completely got it spot on. And if Spotify is listening, I am open to $100 million deal. I do not think I'm the next Joe Rogan, but I will take your, what is that, 9 digits? I'll take your 9 digits any day of the week. I'll find a way to be happy. So
that makes two of us. So
exactly.
Well, kind of pivoting. So I'm super impressed because you're releasing Babylon Will Rise, which I haven't finished, but so far it's really good.
Thank you.
And this is your second novel that you've released this year in 2024. I've released 2 novellas plus a short story collection, which I don't think were nearly as intensive as writing 2 novels, at least I want to think. And I'm kind of tired at the end of this year. So like I just have to ask you, like, hey, what were you thinking trying to do 2 books in 1 year, and how are you feeling?
So I'll give you away some secret sauce. If I had actually written 2 complete books in 1 year, that would have been an amazing accomplishment. I did not. So Breach of Trust was written over the course of probably a year and a half. Finished it up last year, so obviously it came out this year. Babylon Will Rise, actually, to take a step back, so Babylon Will Rise is the second release for the Omega Group. The first one was last year with Ransom Daughter, which we came on and talked about. Ransom Daughter was basically a fairly short novella that I wrote years ago. Couldn't even tell you what year it was, honestly, but it was years ago. Needed work, needed some stuff thrown into it, so I spent a good chunk of last spring and summer 2023 getting Ransom Daughter ready for prime time. Babylon Will Rise was written, the first draft, soon after Ransom Daughter's first draft. And it was the same thing. It started as a novella. It was bigger than Ransom Daughter, but it still wasn't a full-length novel. So once I got Ransom Daughter in a good spot last year, I had Breach of Trust pretty much in a good, I was comfortable with Breach of Trust already at that point. I was still editing it. that's when I grabbed Babylon Will Rise, which had a completely different name at the time, and started working back on that. Had to reread it to start with. As I started rereading it, I realized how lousy I was at certain things back in the day. So I started fixing it, started editing, started working on it, adding chapters, moving stuff around. So a lot of the last year and a half has been more being a book doctor than a full on writer of full length novels every, 3 or 4 months.
Gotcha.
I'm back in that world now. I'm writing Supreme Justice, which hopefully will come out next summer, 2025. I finished a chapter on the plane Sunday, well, I guess morning while I was flying. It was probably afternoon here on the East Coast. Let my mom read it. So I'm kind of back in writing mode now because I have to be to get another book out for next summer. But yeah, 2 a year. I think 2 a year is doable if it's your full-time job, if you're getting paid to do it, but it's still a lot. So that's how I was able to do 2. And I've got plans to do 2 next year. Supreme Justice is one I have still a good chunk to write in the next couple months, which I plan to do. And then the book that I would like to come out with at the end of the year, I'm trying to straddle these 2 worlds of having the Body Man series and some of the offshoots from the Body Man, and then the Omega Group series. So next year's, if I can make it happen, the second release for next year would actually be a Troy Evans origin story. Again, something I wrote years ago. I've reread it in the last year. It's a really solid story. It needs some working. So if I can get everything in place, I'd like to be working on that by spring, early summer, and see if I can get that one out at the end of next year. So I might try 2 again next year. I don't think that's sustainable unless Spotify, Netflix, Prime, one of them starts throwing some suitcases full of cash at me.
Yeah, same here. It's interesting because right now I'm like working on 2 projects for the Shadows of Deception saga, and then I actually have like a Cold War series that takes place in the Shadows of Deception universe, but it takes place before any of my main characters in the current timeline were around. So that's actually where
nice.
Like I've actually brought in, I think I can kind of share this now. Like I've sent a few ideas to Steve Stratton because he was in the Secret Service when Reagan was president, so he can give some insight as to what dates actually corresponded to what events and whatnot. That one's not going to be done for a while, but it's interesting to kind of have all of these different projects on the on different burners for sure.
Right. I know back in the day, Brad Taylor, he was doing 2 books a year, and that was his full time. He had retired from the lieutenant colonel from the Army. So obviously he had a pension coming in, plus so that allows you to write more when you have an income coming in on the side. And if your books are selling really well, if you have a good advance from your publisher, then that might be just what you need to kind of, make your living. But I know 2 books for him were really hard, and that was his full-time, basically, job. So, yeah, it's a lot. Again, I try to tell people this all the time. If you're getting into writing because you think, you're going to be the next Jack Carr or you're going to be the next Tom Clancy or whatever, fill in the blank of the more successful names, J.K. Rowling. I was just kind of trolling around Edinburgh last week and where she used to write and walk around. If that's what you're getting into this for, get out before you get in. Because the chance of you being that one is very, very slim. So get into it because you love writing. And then maybe you will be one of those 1% of 1%. And that's what those people really are. They are the exception to the rule. So you better know that from the get-go. And you better be okay with that. Or you're probably going to be very disappointed when you get your first statement of sales or your royalties from a publisher or whatever. You're going to be like, darn. Now, some people don't. Some people get those and they're like, sweet, I'm going to buy me a Maserati. But most people, you're going to buy a Matchbox. So I love a Maserati maybe, but not one you can squeeze in.
Well, I remember when I first published Shadows of Deception, and I think I made like $100 in the first month, and I was ecstatic because I knew that the book was good, at least in my opinion, but you never know what people are going to think of it until, it's out there in the wild. And that's what, and that's what I tell people too. Like, yeah, you can, it's great if you want to be an author and, like making money is a lofty goal, but you want to do it because it's something that you actually enjoy and that you have stories to tell. So,
Well, you've got to me. I always say this, and I always when I say it, it sounds like very selfish thing. But man, you better love what you write. You better enjoy those stories. You better write for yourself.
yeah,
When I read it, when I write a chapter and read it back, and I smile and I go, yes, I did it. That's the majority of my satisfaction to it. Now, do I like getting kind, reviews and comments and people coming up and saying something to me? 100%. I have an ego. I love to hear that I'm doing a good job, but that's not why I do it. That's not what drives me. That's not what, is pushing me. What's pushing me is I'm trying to tell a story that at the end of the day that I like to read and hear.
yeah, which is kind of ironic because, as we've also talked about before, it's I think it's ironic because I'm in the boat now that you and a lot of other authors are in, where once the book is done, you won't really read it again unless you're referencing something for the next book or something like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's always on to the next thing. And maybe some authors don't work that way. So just speaking for myself, it's always the next thing.
yeah,
I don't know, 20 or so early readers for Babylon Will Rise, and vast majority, everyone that responded back was very kind, and the vast majority said it's the best thing you've written. And that does make me feel good. That makes me feel like I set out to do something and I accomplished it in the eyes of other people. But in my mind already, the best thing I've written is what I'm writing right now. It's Supreme Justice.
yeah,
Better than all of them. Maybe better than all of them combined. That's my juice. That's what I want. And that's what keeps pushing me to like keep doing this. And I hope it never fades, because it sure feels great to write something that you're proud of.
I was, because people always ask me like, well, what's your favorite book you've written? And I always tell them, well, I love Shadows of Deception. The Fourth Estate is my favorite that I've written because I feel like that's where I really took off and got my stride as a
Right.
published author. But I always tell people, like, what I'm writing right now is probably my favorite project because I'm really invested in it right now. And I know what's going to happen, and I just can't wait for the other readers to find out what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I think
Speaking
you're,
of, go
go ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say your first one, it's like with anything. Like, and I've said this in podcasts before again, so forgive me, but first time you have a child, and I know you haven't had kids, but first time you have a kid, I mean, that experience is with you because it's this amazing thing that's never happened. You have a second kid. It's an amazing experience, but it's not the first time. So I think people's first book ends up a lot of times being something they kind of draw back to just because it's taken so much work to get to that point and to get that first one done. It's a massive relief. And I think emotionally you have a connection to that book that you might never have to any of your other books. But probably the dirty little secret is chances are it's probably the worst book that's been published. It might not be the worst book you've written. That probably didn't get published. But that first one you get published might not be your best book because, sometimes you don't know what you're doing and you got over the hump and you got it published. But by the second, third, fourth, fifth, you start getting, you find your legs. You start finding your voice
Yeah.
much better. I think you get better, especially if you're treating it like it is a craft. You get better with experience, like with anything, almost anything in life.
Yeah, I mean, there are still things like in the first Shadows of Deception book that I think are, pretty good, but there are a few areas where I'm like, man, in hindsight, I really wish I had changed this, or man, I didn't know that this character was going to be so, so popular. I wish I hadn't killed him off at the end of the series, and there's no way I can bring him back because he took a bullet to
Right.
the head.
Yep.
So, stuff like that.
I think the beauty is once you put that out, whether it's through a publisher or self-published, that's it. You're done with it. Because I think if we didn't have that finality to it, we could tinker with stories forever. Because if you go back and read something you did earlier, you change it. Oh man, I wish that character hadn't said that. Or like you said, I wish I hadn't shot that character because wow, the fans really ended up loving that character. That's why it's great that once that book's out, and again, that's kind of why, back to what you said earlier, you almost don't go back and reread your books. Because if you did, you'd probably be like, oh man, I want to make changes. No, don't. You can't make changes. It's out. It's done. I had the
Yeah.
option to change a few things with Body Man, only because publisher put it out. It was out for a little over 2 years before the publisher went under. And then I got the rights back. And at that point, I had to kind of make this decision. Do I try to get it with another publisher? It's already sold. It sold well. Or, what do I do with this thing? So I ended up, kind of putting it under my own brand, created my own entity. And that took, 6 months of my life to get everything in place. So I did tinker with it, though. So the version that a lot of people read in 2021, 2022, the story is 100% the same, but there's less to it. Like what I put out this year in 2024, The Body Man is about, I don't know, 6,000 to 8,000 words less. So I trimmed a lot of
Yeah.
stuff out. The publisher made edits. I ended up discarding everything the publisher did. I actually worked off the file I had professionally edited before the publisher got it. So the version of The Body Man that people buy now that they can go out and get, and a lot of people have been buying it this year, Kindle Unlimited, it's had, I don't know, like 800,000 page reads or something so far for the year, something really good. That's actually not the version that originally came out. It's a tighter version. It's tweaked a little bit. The publisher had added in some things with their discretion that weren't changes to the story. It was just embellishing certain like weapons or this and that. I took all that stuff out. I just went back with what was my vision of the story. That's the one I want to have out there. And it got well received. The people that read it ever since. So I know what I put out was a great compliment to the first book. No, the first edition, I guess you should say.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of did the same a little bit because I so the first Shadows of Deception book I published with Kindle's software, and it was okay, but it wasn't great. But once I got Atticus, I kind of reformatted it and tightened some things up and changed things because I had the ability to actually kind of format the book the way I wanted instead of what Amazon was kind of constraining me to do with their,
Yep.
Software.
Yep.
So that was great. In regards to Babylon Will Rise, though, itself, like, the one thing I'm curious about is, like, where'd you come up with that title? Is it biblically based or, anything? So what's the backstory of Babylon Will Rise?
So I will reveal to you're the first person to reveal this to, at least online. So originally, back when the story was first written, it was called Project Nebuchadnezzar. As I've gotten a little more versed in the publishing world, I realized Project Nebuchadnezzar is a lot of letters, not easy to say, and it sure as hell doesn't look good on a book cover. So most certainly biblical. The Babylon Will Rise actually ended up coming through one of my reads last year because I knew the title didn't work. I knew and I don't change titles. Like the Body Man title, that was the title. Breach of Trust, that was the title. So every other book I've written in the past, and I had multiple that are unpublished, that's the title. I mean, that was like my first idea was the title. So I always, to me, that's kind of like it's my firstborn. It's important to me.
Yeah.
You're not going to take that away from me. I knew reading through Project Nebuchadnezzar, it was wrong. I'm like, oh man, what was I thinking back then? I was a fool. So as I read through the book, and people that, get a copy here starting December 5th and on, there's a line in the book where one of the characters that's being interrogated, his 3-word phrase is Babylon will rise. And as soon as I read through that, years before, I was like, that's my title. That's my title. It'll look good on a cover, much better than Project Nebuchadnezzar. So Babylon Will Rise. And it completely factors into what the story is about once you read the story as well. So it wasn't a one-off title that didn't apply to the entire story. It's what it should have been originally. It just took some years and some tinkering with to get to that point where Babylon Will Rise is out.
Well, that's very cool. Can you kind of give us a synopsis without, spoiling anything? I've read the book, but for people listening at home, of what the plot line is and what can we expect Troy and the Omega Group to get into this time.
Yeah, glad to. So it's definitely a blend of faction fiction, which is what I like to do, fact and fiction for sure. I think Brad Thor's probably copyrighted the term faction. And so, true story, Iran and Iraq had a war back in the early 80s. True story, Iraq used chemical weapons on Iran, killed a lot of people. So maybe not so much of a fact. There are some rumors that Iran got themselves a nuclear weapon. Well, Saddam was basically, fact, pretty much put in power or allowed to be in power because of the United States. Saddam goes to the United States and says, hey, Iran's got the big bomb. I've been messing with their people. I need a big bomb. We give it to them. We give them two. Give them two nukes. Not a good thing. Fast forward to 2003, Bush 43, decides it's time to take Saddam out of the picture. First thing he does is go after those two nukes. We know where they are. We've been doing inspections every few months for decades. So they send a team in there, highly qualified team. They get to the base. Everyone's dead. There's no weapons. So for the next few decades, we're trying to find these two missing nuclear weapons that we gave to Iraq. And what ends up happening is they end up hitting the black market. And because of the circumstances you read in the book, the United States decides to send the Omega Group in, but not just the 6 guys, they get a new member. They get a female member this time, and that causes all kinds of good plot twists. Women always cause good plot twists, that's for sure. So God bless them.
Yeah, oh yeah, they definitely do. It's funny because I always get suggestions from people of, you should write this specific female character for this actress. And I'm like, well, there's no way, unless the movie gets picked up within the next 2 years or so, that this actress is going to be able to play,
Right.
This character. But thanks for the inspiration.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence with that. I think there's nothing wrong with writing someone, picturing like whoever, you're Anna Kendrick, whatever the actress you think at the time is what interests you. Nothing wrong with writing a character based on that. But what you said is 100% right. The likelihood of that character ever getting that manuscript one day and being able to play that role is so far removed and that's one of the questions I'll get every now and then. It's like, do you envision, do you know what Troy, do you envision exactly what he looks like and all that? And what actor would you want him to play? I don't go down that path. I don't go down that path because I know it's so slim that actually occurs that I don't want to set myself up for disappointment. So to me, they're kind of like, they're not faceless because I give features and stuff to them.
Right.
But they're non-descriptive. I don't go into I don't have the exact image of what they look like, partly for that reason. Plus, I also like the fact that the canvas isn't completed. And I think that helps me from a writing perspective. So I do a pretty thorough bio on everyone. Yeah. I know my favorite character to write, I will admit to anyone, is the Jackal. And the Jackal is not me in any way, shape, or form, but he's got a little bit of my sarcasm sometimes. He's definitely dirty at times, but at the end of the day, he's got a really good heart, and that doesn't always come out, but it's, it kind of is, I think, coming out more in this story than it did in Ransom Daughter, that you got a guy who's really been hurt in life and has had some things happen in life, and he kind of hides behind this Casanova shell of, I don't want a relationship, I don't want this and that, I've been hurt, and, deep down, and that's the fun part. I love taking characters and giving them personality. To me, that's the job, basically.
Well, no, it's interesting that you bring up the Jackal because I've read Ransom Daughter and, a bit of Babylon Will Rise. And the Jackal, I don't think I've shared this with you offline or anything, but the Jackal reminds me of a neighbor I actually have who's a veteran, and he's very sarcastic and whatnot, just like the Jackal, but he's probably also older than the Jackal is at this point, but he's also gone through some hardship, had to raise, his 2 kids on his own because his wife left him. But the one thing that you've always done really well is you're very good. I think one of your biggest strengths, at least as a reader, is writing compelling characters.
Thank you.
And I think that's something that, like, a lot of authors who I admire, they might be great at action set pieces, but they're not always, I wouldn't say they're bad at defining characters, but some of them are weaker at it than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, thank you for the compliment first. I think part of that and where you're going with that, it's so easy just to create a kind of a one-dimensional character. You have a bad guy. He's trying to do whatever it is, harm the good guys, try to blow up the United States, try to steal something. And, it's easy to fall in the caricatures of, what that person might be like. To me, and I'm not saying I never fall in that trap either. It's super easy to fall in that trap, but it's like, no, I want to give that person a personality. Probably one of the greatest compliments I ever got with the Body Man books is I had multiple people reach out to me and say, Peter Kasha, who's not a good guy in the book, who, spoiler alert, dies in the Body Man.
Yeah.
Like, I was rooting for him. I liked Kasha by the end. And that's where I knew, after the book was out and I started getting reader feedback, that's where I knew I was getting better at the craft, is if I can make a bad character be sympathetic and people want to root for that person, then I'm doing it right. Because it's easy to root for the protagonist. I think we're hardwired to want, at least in our culture, you want the good guy to win. You want him to get the girl. You want all those things to happen. It's a lot harder to root for the bad guy. And so if you can get people to root for the bad guy, you're doing something right.
It's also one of the things I've kind of played with too is the idea that your character might be good, but one of your characters might also be deeply flawed, and they might have some very questionable, they might have done some very questionable things in their past. The person who you might think is, a model person, that they might not be the worst person in the world, but they're not the Superman, character that everyone thinks they are. And sometimes those are the best, characters to kind of write too, to give them a redemption arc or something like that. So.
And the fine line you walk with that is if you get them too far onto the dark side, you can pull them back, but you can lose the audience. I will not say which books I'm going to reference, but there's some characters out there, very well-received series, that what the protagonist did to me turned me off from wanting to read books, because I'm like, man, I can't really root for that guy now. I'll use this example because it's not writers or whatever. And I know we've talked about this, I think, offline or online or whatever, and I know it's a big influence for you for writing, but I loved the 24 series. But there was a part in that series where Jack Bauer did things he had to do to save people that he crossed the line, and to me, he no longer had a redemption story. He wasn't that much better than the bad guy.
Right.
That's that fine line you got to be really careful of, because you can dance around it. But as soon as you get the toe over that line that varies for each reader, as soon as you get over that, it's easy to lose your readers. And again, there's multiple big name series out there that I don't read anymore because I don't like the protagonists. And other people love those protagonists and they go on and on about them. And I look at them and go, not my thing anymore. I'm on to the next series or whatever.
That's honestly been kind of like an issue I've had. I don't know if you watched the show Yellowstone at all.
I'm halfway through the fifth. I haven't started the last batch of fifth season. I'm at like 1 or 2 episodes left on the first batch of the fifth season.
Yeah. Well, so like everyone likes to talk at like Beth and how much of like a badass character she is, but like part of me is also like, Beth is a sociopath. She definitely does have some redeeming moments, but she also has a few moments where I've kind of like, I'm not sure if I can really root for her that much as I was.
A great example.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues with, I could talk for hours, but I think one of the things that is really that has kind of instructed me is I feel like some writers can be really inconsistent with writing characters
Sure.
too. And that's
Yeah.
that's something that I've really noticed a lot more in television. Like I don't know about you, but I'm someone who it's really hard for me to watch TV now because
Mhm.
as an author, I'm always going, well, if I were writing this, I would write it this way or something like
So for me, yeah, I agree with that. And for me, that's why reading now is more difficult than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I had a list of all my big favorite authors, and I read every book they came out with.
yeah.
Now that I've been writing and taking it seriously for 10 years, in the last 5, 6 years, that list has changed dramatically. And I read a lot more outside my genre I write in than within my genre. So I gravitate more towards like crime novels and I read a lot of nonfiction now. It's just, yeah, you almost get to that point where it's challenging sometimes because of the things you were discussing. And same thing definitely with television. I was sitting on the plane, what was it, 8 hour and 34 minute flight from London to Charlotte on Sunday. I started 4 different movies, and within 5 minutes, I was like, they're boring. And they were big name movies that I just never seen because I watch so few movies nowadays. And I had, better part of over 8 hours. And I wrote for the first hour and a half. And then I was like, okay, it's just too hard to write on a plane long term for me, just comfort level and all that. And I finished the chapter. That was my
Yeah.
goal. I finished my chapter. So I started flipping through the television, on the big screen in front of me. It was so disappointing. It's like, oh, this movie got great reviews supposedly. And I'd watch the first 5 minutes of it and I'd be like, nope. I back out and go to the next one. I ended up watching Ocean's 13, which I probably haven't watched in like 6 or 7 years. I knew exactly what was going to happen, but I just wanted to veg out and not be like, I'm going to be so disappointed 20 minutes into this movie. It's like, no, I know what's going to happen. Al Pacino's a dick in this movie and, all the stuff that's happening. I know what the boys are going to do. And I just, Ellen Barkin was doing her thing and I was just, it was comfort food in a way, while you're eating. So
Yeah, there are definitely some movies that get overhyped that aren't as good as you think, but then there are others that aren't very well known, and you're like, how is this not more received?
right.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
that's not the case. Well, so you've got Babylon Rise out, you've got Breach of Trust out, you're working on the next Body
Mhm.
Man book. What a
Well, not yet. Not yet. So I'm working on Supreme Justice. So Supreme Justice is, and I kind of said that earlier, that it's in that world. It's in the world of the Body Man, and the Body Man is going to be in it. I haven't figured out, or I haven't written much of the Body Man yet, so I'm not sure how big he's going to be in that one. It's a Merci de Ata, so it's my female assassin from the Body Man and Breach of Trust. It's her. She's carrying the load on this one, and she gets to a point in the story where she has to call in her favor, just like the Body Man's had to call in some favors. She calls in the favor and brings the Body Man into the narrative. So it's in that universe. The next Body Man book, the third Body Man book, tentatively, I know what I'm doing with it. I've written a few chapters. Tentatively, probably summer of 2026 for that one, which I know fans don't appreciate that. They want a book every year. I just can't do that. Plus, I have all these conflicting stories in my head that I don't want to push off for 10 years of my life.
yeah,
I'm
yeah, that
getting older.
yeah, that's. I'm in the same boat for sure. Well, especially like writing, especially like with writing prequels and whatnot. That's another thing I wanted to ask you is like as far as the series go, do you have like a big flow chart of when each book like connects or okay, yeah.
In there. So when my
Yeah.
Alzheimer's kicks in stronger here, I'm screwed real quick because I do actually have. So I don't have a flow chart. No, I do have fairly detailed notes, but they're not really notes that like spread out the universe of where I want to go.
Right.
So a lot of it is more internal, which is dangerous. And I know it's dangerous. I know people that work off sticky notes and big charts and all that. I might at some point. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet. So it's a little dangerous what I'm doing probably. And the readers will hit me with the two. They'll Kathy Bates me real quick if I jack it up, but I'm planning not to. So
Hey, I'm relieved to know that that I'm in the same boat as you are. Every once in a while when I get beta readers, they'll be like, no, this didn't happen this way. John Ryder did this instead, and I'm like, okay, well, thank you. That's why I have beta readers. I overlooked that detail.
I'm still a pantser at heart, so I've
Yeah, me too.
done more plotting in the last 5 years than I did the first five for sure. But I'm still, at the end of the day, and I've talked about this in other interviews. I think part of that is I can't, I know Kyle Mills. Kyle's a great writer, good guy. He writes these 40,000 word timelines of, what he's writing. Every chapter is already mapped out before he starts. I can't do that. Now, he can do that, and he can wake up one morning and say, hey, chapter 42. And the next time he writes, okay, chapter 17. And he can just go and pull back these massive notes that he's created and these outlines he's done, basically. That, to me, takes away from the creativity. And
Yeah.
I think, in a way, I'm trying to, it sounds weird to say this, I think I'm trying to defeat myself at some point. Can I back myself into a corner I can't get out of? And I think I want to prove that I can. You can't stop me. I'm going to find a way around this. But at some point I might get to a story where I just screw myself and I have to rewrite a story. And I know people that have rewritten novels multiple times. I have fixed novels multiple times, but I've never had to rewrite an entire novel.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try not to do that.
No, I'll just tell you from experience. It might sound goofy, but like I had to do a lot of outlines, even for like fictional stories for some of the creative writing classes that I did in college. And I hated the process. One of the reasons I'm a pantser is because when I outlined, I would get such anxiety over the outlines that I was kind of like I don't know how this is possible because outlines are supposedly supposed to like keep you from getting writer's block, but I was actually getting more writer's block and anxiety over that as opposed to like when I went to write the first Shadows of Deception, I had ideas, so I basically just did like a rough draft and pantsed it and then went from there.
Okay.
And I basically did that for the entire book, and well, people bought it, so after revisions and whatnot, so couldn't have been too bad. So
well, you find your path, you find your way. Again, there's no template out there. People think there's some. I've got some books. I've got On Writing by Stephen King. I've got The Successful Novelist by David Morrell. So I've got books that give people a good blueprint on how to go about the process.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, there's no book that tells you how to write a story. You have to have creativity within you. And what works for you might not work for me. So you just have to find your way forward. Someone reached out to me recently and said, do you write every day? And I was like, no. And I mean, in the last couple of years, I've gone weeks without writing anything substantial, at least. In some form, I'm writing every day creatively. I'm doing something that's just marketing or whatever. But am I actually adding to a story I'm working on every day? No. But I also do that in phases. Supreme Justice is in a spot where I need like 40 to 50,000 words. I haven't decided what number I'm going to come in my head. So I've got to be dedicated to writing pretty much every day between now and February, at least in some form, so I can hit my goals. And I work well into that. When I know there's pressure versus if you tell me, hey, just finish this book when you want, I'll be like, there's a new season of The Diplomat on, and Kerry Russell's really good in that. So I'll freaking watch television at night instead of reading. So I can't allow myself to do that.
Yeah.
I have to be disciplined.
Do you have like a set schedule of when you write, during those periods, or is it just? I would imagine because you have a day job and because you're a parent, you just kind of write whenever you can.
I wrote on a plane on Sunday. On Friday, I wrote on a equivalent of a Mercedes Greyhound bus going to the south part of Ireland. I wrote in a hotel for a little bit last week. So no schedule. And it probably would be better to have a schedule, but I've talked about this again before in other interviews. Full-time job. I have my kids about half the time, 45%, 45% of the time or whatever. So when I have my kids, that's my joy in life, but also that's my responsibility. So writing is very limited on those days. So a lot of it becomes when I'm not having my kids, when I'm off my 9 to 5 job. That's when I'll find my hole. So that it is typically in the evening. I'm not a good morning person. I think God made the morning for you to sleep.
Same here.
Although I say that, and when I get up in the morning and I'm somewhere and I can get out in nature and watch the sunrise and all that, I do feel invigorated. So there is something about the morning, but the words don't seem to come to me very well in the morning. So they seem to be coming to me at night. That's my muse. That's when the muse talks to me. So
Same.
yeah. So that's, but yeah, there's no set, and there's no, again, going back to what I said before, there's no right answer on that. People say, okay, I want to model what you do. It's like, no, don't model what I do. Definitely don't. Find what works for you.
Yeah, that's what I've always told people is like, look, I could tell you what works for me. Like, I'm not super secretive, but I don't think, just because it works for me doesn't mean it's going to work for you. And it also really depends on the genre, too. I think certain genres or certain mediums take different, approaches, too.
Yeah, 100% I agree.
One, I guess, kind of deviating from the Bottom and the thriller work you've done is I noticed in your intro for Tale of Two Scribes, you say that you've also written poetry. So,
I wrote a poem the other day, actually. So, yep.
Are we going to be getting a poetry book from Eric Bishop in the near future?
Hell no. No. You'd think I was an idiot if I put my poetry out. You'd be like, this dude can't write worth a crap. I don't think so. I have a thought on some of the poems, and I've not explored it to its potential. So maybe some format of them could come out at some point. But no, poetry to me it's more expressive of what I'm going through maybe at times.
Yeah.
It's more of an outlet to me. I don't get much out of reading people's poetry, and so I guess my brain says people aren't going to get much out of reading mine as well. But I say that, and there's some friends of mine that write poetry, and I enjoy reading their poetry. So like anything, it's so subjective, and that's what I try to tell people too about the writing processes. There's people out there that get the New York Times bestseller list, and people read their books and they think it's like the best thing since sliced bread. Then someone else can't read 2 pages without going, this is gibberish garbage. It's so subjective. It's all just what your head processes for those words is not going to be the same what the other person processes that's reading right next to you. Same words.
Yeah.
Different person, different perspective, different circumstances. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just curious because that, that came up in your intro.
John Guarnieri is publishing a poetry book. I think it's coming out in, I want to say April, I think he announced, if I recall. So I know John's doing a poetry book. The other thing, too, with poetry is, again, there's poets out there that are successful, absolutely. But it's hard to make a living writing books.
Yeah.
Everything I know about the process is it's probably harder to make a living writing poetry books.
Yeah.
It's just your niche, your slice of the pie is so much smaller. And if you want to do it for money, you probably should be writing romance or softcore like smut. That probably is going to be a better chance of making you more money than political thrillers. Or I'm even seeing a difference just for my own internally is for pre-orders and all that. I'm seeing a difference with writing suspense and thrillers versus writing something with more military. It's not as big. It's not as well received. So I'm starting to I write my stories, again, back to what I said earlier, because they're stories I want to tell. But if I want to do it from a financial perspective, I have to look at how things sell, how things move. It can help steer maybe where I go in the future, just from a monetary standpoint of what sells versus what doesn't.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up too, because like I was actually looking at sales, and I released Blood Ties, which is, my short story crime series.
Right.
I talked about that on your show. As of we're recording this on Tuesday, it'll air on Wednesday. I just released Shadows of Deception as a hardcover collection of 3 novellas so far.
Saw that today.
I haven't changed a thing other than putting it in, a hardcover collection, basically. And yet, like, Blood Ties really didn't sell anything for the first week, right? Mm-hmm. Shadows of Deception, at this time, I think it's only been, like, available on Amazon since, like, 9 a.m. I've already gotten, like, 5 orders from it. So I'm like, well, okay. Now I know which series people are actually really interested in to buy.
Right.
So that's definitely that's been super informative.
Yep.
Love both, but now I'm glad to know which series the audience really likes.
Yeah, and well, you have to be in touch with your audience. Again, it depends what's your end goal. If you're wanting to put stuff out because of the story that's within you, and you don't think about it from a, if you don't think about, I want to make money on this, that changes your perspective versus, hey, I'd like to quit my day job one day. Okay, well, if you want to quit your day job one day and be a full-time writer, a couple things you need to know. First of all, less than 2% of writers make $100,000 or more, at least in the United States. Okay. Anyone that goes to a grocery store right now knows you can't earn $10,000 a year and live. Just not possible, not humanly possible to have a place to live, a car, gas, a significant other that wants to eat too, you eat, whatever. You gotta, nowadays, Oreos are 6 something. I think at my grocery, I live in Podunkville. I live in the Western North Carolina, out in the middle of nowhere. Oreos are $6.98 when they're not on sale. Well, you need to you have to sell a couple books just to buy a pack of Oreos, and you can eat those pretty quickly. So if you're looking at it from a monetary standpoint of what you need to do, well, that can affect, your perspective on what am I going to pursue? How hard am I going to push this? What direction am I going to go with it? So you've got to know the business side of it. If you're getting into this and thinking you want to make it a career, you have to treat it like a business, which is a hard thing to balance with treating it from a creative standpoint as well, which you also have to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me it's a mix of things, because I'm not sure if I'm dead set on, making it my livelihood, but it's certainly something it's nice pocket income, and it kind of augments what I do with the show. For me, it's kind of like a hybrid of the two. Yes, I like to make money, and I'm at the point now where, thank goodness, I'm able to. And maybe some of that will influence which titles I focus on more. But also, I think I'm also, I put out Blood Ties just to see if anyone else would like it. I've gotten good feedback, but like I said again, I'm kind of someone where I'm putting stuff out that I want to, see out there. And if people like it, they like it. And if not, okay, it's out there. And maybe the people who will like it aren't even here yet. That's another thing. So.
Right. Well, again, I'm beating a horse with it, but it comes down to be proud of what you work on, because it's so easy to be caught up in the number side of it. Like, talk offline. Okay, I'm considered a writer that's sold good, done well. But if I compare myself, to, say, to just go Tom Clancy, since he's already passed, but Tom Clancy has sold a lot of books. I am nothing compared to a Tom Clancy. Nothing. I'm not even I'm not even at the base of the mountain probably compared to Tom Clancy. However, I see people post stuff online where they go, hey, I had 100 page reads for my book this month or this year, And they're legitimately, at least according to their post, or what you read from their social media posts, they seem excited that they got 100-page reads. It's like, after a while with doing Kindle Unlimited, if I don't have 2,000 or 3,000 page reads in a day, I'm like, man, what happened? Why isn't my books getting read? Those numbers to that person that's selling, getting 100-page reads in a month are astronomical. Again, it's all your perspective on how you look at it.
Yeah.
And you got to be very careful with that, because comparing yourself, I always tell my kids that it's really, and my son's a musician, and I always tell him it's really dangerous to start comparing yourself to he's starting to get to know some really, one of his instructors, he had a tutoring session today, and his instructor is like one of the top bluegrass instructor or musicians in the country. Phenomenal guy. And I tell my son, you got to be careful, because it's easy to compare and say, man, this is what success is, or this is what I need to get to. It's like, what I try to tell everyone, my kids included, and myself, is be the best version of yourself. Going down the comparison road is almost always going to lead to disappointment.
Someone recently asked me, like, if I was jealous of any of the authors who, like you, for example. Someone actually asked me if I'm jealous of the success that you've had, and I told them, I said no. I said I'm actually happy for Eric's success because A, he's earned it, but also, I mean, like I talked out on the Tale of Two Scribes to you, I remember a time when the indie, author community, the self-published community was laughed at, entirely. So anyone who, can even have like a modicum of success, whether that be you or,
Mm-hmm.
Me or Terrence McCauley or anyone,
Yeah.
anyone who can kind of break that barrier, I'm happy for them because that's kind of a win for all of us. That's the way I
Yeah.
see it.
Absolutely.
So,
I completely agree. Well, I think it was derided for so long because people saw it as, well, that's the easy way to get published. And
yeah.
to some degree, they're correct. The hard way to get published is to go get an agent and get a big five publisher. That's really hard. Again, if that's what you want, pursue that. But why do you want that? There's people that have agents and big publishers, or take that back a step. There's people that get themselves an agent. I know several of them. They've never had a book published in 5,
Right.
6, 7, 8 years. They haven't had a book published. Well, what's your goal? Do you want an agent or do you want a book published? You get a publisher. You know how many people I know that have publishers that have to have full-time jobs? You don't get a publisher and all of a sudden, drive a Land Rover. Doesn't work that way. Someone might get that, but again, it's a lot of perspective. So you have to figure out what is it you want. Now, publishing is so difficult to get your foot in the door. And the publishers, and again, this isn't a knock at the publishing industry per se. Why do the publishers bring people into the fold? Because they think they can make money off you. That's bottom line.
Yeah.
No question on that. They're not bringing in, this is the best writer of the generation. Now, chances are, if you get the best writer of the generation, publisher is probably going to make a lot of money because hopefully other people will feel that way. But at the end of the day, the publisher is trying to make money. So they're picking that person that they think is going to help their bottom line. And then in the meantime, that person's bottom line gets helped as well. But there's a lot of really great authors out there, and I've read some of them, that they cannot get an agent, or their agent cannot sell a book to a publisher, and they go the self-publishing route or the small publisher route. And that's their way to actually get their words out there. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely,
Right.
It might have been 20 years ago, there might have been a stigma. 10 years ago, there might have still been a stigma. I think now, and I go back to Kyle Mills. Kyle Mills was with, the Vince Flynn books, and he did other, I think did he do Ludlum? He did another legacy series.
He did the Ludlum series
Yeah,
too.
Ludlum. He's now with a group called Author Equity. They have connections with the big publishers, but they're broken off. They're not it's not Penguin. It's not Simon & Schuster. So he's actually gone that route. And I think it's going that route as a big thing because, you got these big buildings in New York City with big rents and all this staff. You know how many books you have to sell to pay for those salaries and to pay for that office leaf space in New York City? It's it's a tough business, very tough business.
Yeah, well, one thing I've actually had a debate on over the last few years. So I use ChatGPT not to write my entire manuscripts, to kind of proofread them and make some trim ups before I send them off to my proofreaders. And
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of been this debate in the indie author community as to whether or not using AI makes you a legit author or not.
Right.
And I've said, and I've talked to others like Zach James who agree with me that yeah, it still does, because if you're using it to like beef up your manuscripts, you're not necessarily using it to cheat or whatever. I also, not a lot of people know this, but I know some people who work in Hollywood, and AI is writing more and more scripts completely, which is kind of one of the things that that was what the writer's strike was partially about last year. And so my perspective, and look, I know people are going to have disagreements with me, but my perspective is it's a tool. No
Mm-hmm.
one's holding a gun to your head to use it, but I think it would be incredibly I think it would be naive of us in the indie author community to just dismiss AI rather than learn to use it as a tool when the big publishers and the big studios are using it anyway.
That's an interesting perspective. I've not touched it. I've used it a little bit for images for marketing.
Yeah,
Bing AI generator. I've used that for some marketing images and stuff, but I've never used it for any kind of writing. And I don't, honestly, I'm kind of ignorant to it. I know I've had a friend who encouraged me to like put a synopsis of my book into it and see what the AI generator would, what Chat GPT would do to it. And I just told him, no interest. It might beef up what it says. I'd rather it be my words. And again, I don't
yeah,
fault anyone that wants to go that route. That's just my perspective. The other twist I was going to say on that is, I mean, there's authors out there that don't write their own books. There's
right,
ghostwriters. The
yeah,
ghostwriting industry is actually a really, I didn't realize it until a couple years ago, and I was just like, wait, what? Because over the years, I realized if you see a book out there, we'll use us as an example. That way we're not offending anyone.
right,
If you ever see a book, so this is a spoiler alert. If you ever see a book out there that on the top of the book, of course it's going to say Eric P. Bishop because I'm a big deal. That's sarcasm,
right.
folks, by the way. I'm not. And if you see Sam Whitfield's name on the bottom, guess what? Sam probably wrote that book. Eric didn't. He just licensed it to Sam and said, hey, Sam, go write the book. I'm in Bora Bora. I can't be bothered to write this damn story.
Yeah,
That, though, I knew about. I knew that worked. Then I started realizing, the more I learned about the industry, that there's times a book says Eric P. Bishop at the top. He didn't write the book. He had paid someone to write the book, and I was ignorant to the fact of, wait, that happens? And they're like, dude, what planet are you under? Of course that happens. I'm not shocked anymore about much of anything because I've learned so much. I was shocked at the time. I was like, really? I couldn't go out there and say, look at my book. The Body Man's All Mine, knowing that Sam Whitfield wrote that book for me. His name's just nowhere on it because I paid Sam, or Sam got royalties, or
right.
whatever deal we worked out. It's just like, what?
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. My day job, kind of, as I do lots of freelance writing, and I actually get a lot of jobs or tasks, as they're sometimes called, to write to quote unquote write reviews for video game blogs. And so basically what happens is these people who are reviewing, they'll already have played the video games. They'll send me like bullet points of their experience playing the game, and then I'm supposed to turn it into an article or whatnot. More often than not, my name is nowhere near on the thing. It's game reviews, or whatever you want to call it, gamereviews.com staff you know, writer or something like
Right.
that. It's so there's a lot of that on the internet too. Same for like traveling and whatnot. So
And I want to be clear, I can't say, I mean, I don't ever intend to do anything like that, but if you ever got big enough and if your name was ever worth enough, can you understand why people would be willing to kind of sell their likeness or whatever? Yeah,
yeah,
I guess I get it. Makes sense.
well, especially if you're someone like James Patterson, who I don't know how old he is, but I would imagine if you're an author and he's been around for a while, I imagine you've been for a while and you're kind of at the age where you want to retire, but you still want those residuals. Why not?
Sure. Well, they've got brands. So James Patterson's a
Yeah.
good brand to talk about or to mention. Tom Clancy. I think there's a new Clancy book out today. Clancy's been dead for, I don't know, 14 years, 16 years, 12 years, a while. Obviously, Vince Flynn's dead. God rest his soul. He was one of my favorites too. So I get it. They keep these legacy series going on, and people connect with the characters. I understand why they do it, and it's a way for families that own that licensing to keep having an income coming. So I totally get why it happens. That's just not my thing. I don't even read the legacy books either. So I've read some Flynn books with Kyle writing, but for the most part, yeah, it's just again, it's I see why it happens. I don't think I'll ever be approached to be a Clancy author or Vince Flynn author or Ludlum author. I don't think I'd be interested if they would ever approach me anyways. It's just not my thing.
Do
I
you?
love my characters. I want to write my own characters. I don't want to put what my spin on Mitch Rappas or Jack Ryan or,
Yeah.
fill in the blank.
Well, that's the other question. I've actually gotten this question a few times, and I'll ask this to you. Do you have a do you have a definitive? Maybe not right now, but do you plan to like end the Bodman story as a whole, or end like Troy's story? Because the one thing I've noticed is that like Mitch Rapp has like chronologically been a character since like the 80s. So he's probably like in his mid 50s at this point and still jumping off buildings and,
Right.
taking down bad guys like he's still in his mid 30s.
Well, I
So,
think I haven't read the last several books. Think what Don did. I think I've heard, or someone told me what Don did with the characters. They went to a younger Mitch Rapp this time, like around 9/11 or something. I think it was back towards the
uh-huh.
early part of the 2000s. So that's, I think, one way that you can extend a character's life. To answer your question, I have some ideas. What I'll say with some authority is the reason I created a role for the Body Man was I didn't want to be tied to one character. So I didn't want Nick Jordan to be the Body Man for 20 years and just write about Nick Jordan. To me, I think part of that probably is because I just kind of got burnt out on some of the Legacy series books that I didn't want to write the same character. I know
Right.
they write other characters. I totally get how it works. And for years, I enjoyed the main characters and all the other ones. I don't want to just have one protagonist I write about for the next 20 years. And I also don't, mine don't have a ton of action. They have action. I enjoy action. But I get exhausted when I read a book that every chapter almost outdoes the previous chapter. So I like suspense more, but I don't necessarily gravitate towards, I guess maybe because I'm more realism. I know if you've got a character that gets hit by a Ford truck in chapter one, in chapter two gets thrown out of a plane, thinking he's Tom Cruise, in chapter three gets shot by, or Bernelli's shotgun. I I can take a step up sometimes and tweak my back. So I end up going, I don't think these
Yeah.
guys can, I don't care if they're in their 40s, late 30s, early 40s, they're going to have some, it's going to be a little harder for them to rebound. They can't get shot and then make love to the female character and then, get thrown through a glass window on the eighth. This isn't the Nakatomi Plaza. They got to die
Yeah.
at some points, which, by the way, it's off camera, but Yes, the Nakatomi Plaza has come out. I've started Christmas decorating since I was out of the country, so Hans Gruber's slowly making his way down.
Nice, nice. Well, actually, one thing I wanted to ask you is you actually mentioned this before we started recording, something on your shelf that you got in
Yeah.
Europe. So, what is that item?
So
That's
it's probably not easily seen on camera. So it's actually made of slate. So several cool things happened. The whole trip was cool. But I had a reader in Ireland that had reached out to me a while before. Trying to get this thing where it's actually camera's picking it up. I had a reader reach out to me and said, "Hey, I'd love to get together with you. I'm probably not going to get. There we go. Love to meet up with you." So he actually lives in Cork City, Cork, Ireland. Can we meet up? Yeah, absolutely. So we were taking a day trip down there. Tony Cronin is his name. And he's like, "Well, I have something for you." Well, it wasn't. We were in this little pub. It's an inn, which everything there is a pub, whether it's a restaurant or an inn or whatever. He knew I was a Guinness fan, so he wanted me to try a Murphy's, which is the Cork version of Guinness, only made in Cork. It's a little less
right.
bitter, got a little more sweet. It was excellent beer. Him and my mom had a coffee. And then he pulls out this box and gives me this, which is, can ding it a little, you can hear it. It's made of slate. It's got the army units that him and his son had served in, and it was one of the coolest things someone has ever given me. It meant a lot to get it. I was really worried bringing it back in the States that it wouldn't get broke, so I wrapped it it was in shrink wrap, but I wrapped it with every piece of clothing I could. So Tony, if you're ever watching this, thank you. I've told him thank you multiple times, but yeah, super great gift. And then the other thing that was kind of interesting about this trip is I landed in Charlotte Sunday afternoon, and for anyone that does international travel or plans to do any international travel, get global entry. Global
Yep.
entry is a minute through. It's so beautiful. My mom didn't have global entry. She told me to use it. She's like, no, you got it. Finally use it. She waited in line with everyone else that didn't have global entry. So 25 minutes later, she made her way through customs. I was waiting the whole time. So I got her bag and my bag. She was flying on to go home. I was getting out of the airport and driving an hour home. Well, I'm waiting there with her bags, and all of a sudden I hear Eric. And I turn around and look, and this guy's coming at me with his hand out. And I'm like, am I going to get mugged here? What's going on? No, it was just someone that recognized me in London at Heathrow at the airport. And we were boarding, so didn't get to come say hi. Came up and talked to me in Charlotte. Very complimentary about the books. Someone I had no idea who they were until now, or until I met them. And it was like kind of one of the first times I've been out in public and recognized as an author. And I'm not in my hometown. So
Right.
another like really cool moment that it's just kind of like, man, that's awesome. That's awesome that actually happened. And it doesn't stoke my ego. It stokes my fire to be like, okay, I need to keep rolling with this. I can get used to being, now maybe if I was Brad Pitt and I couldn't step outside without 500 people around me, I wouldn't like being recognized. But when it's one person every 10 years, hey, it feels pretty darn good.
Does it ever feel surreal for you to get recognized? I mean, I know that you're not like an I know that you're not an A-lister, but like sometimes
I'm a G-lister. I'm down the alphabet pretty far. So yeah, it felt pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I'll use that too. Yeah, I'm a G-lister as well, but like some well-known people have, read my books, and it's always kind of like, wait, I've been a fan of you, but you're a fan of my work? Wow, like it's, at least for me, like sometimes like it's very humbling and kind of like I didn't even know that you were into thrillers or something like
That's
like
I think
that.
the best word to use,
So
Sam, is it's humbling. It's humbling to get that. Well, again, this is it's such a hard thing to put your words out there, put your stories out there. So when the time comes that you start getting some recognition for that, yeah, it just kind of gives you
yeah,
that boost of you're on the right path. So it feels good. I mean, I think everyone wants to be acknowledged in life. Now, when you get maybe too famous, you wish you probably, had your anonymity, of course, but that's rare for a writer to ever reach that level. I mean, really, maybe J.K. Rowling. I mean, even like you mentioned Patterson before, James Patterson could probably walk through a vast majority of places in the United States, and nobody would have a
Yeah.
clue who he was. No clue. No clue.
It's definitely harder for at least comedians that I
Comedians, celebrities, any kind of actor, actress that, when you see when their face is their marketing, that
yeah.
makes it a lot harder. For an author, their face is rarely, it's their books that get the people's attention. It's not the face on the back cover or on a website somewhere, rarely. Again, there's always exceptions to every rule, and that's kind of the nice thing. If you can be one of those really successful authors, and there's authors out there that make millions of dollars a year, pretty good gig to tell stories and probably have most of your anonymity at the same time. So you get recognized, sure, but you don't get recognized, 20 times when you're in the grocery store.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's the other interesting thing at like podcasting is there are a few of us who get recognized, but like unless you're Joe Rogan, normally you only get recognized by like other podcasters or something. So
Correct.
So it's nice that way.
Yep.
But
I agree.
well, anyway, I really appreciate you coming on. Before we sign off, when does the book come out? And where can people find your work?
So Babylon Will Rise out December 5th, ebook, paperback, hardcover. Amazon, of course, has all those, but other retailers will have the paperback. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Target, Walmart. Pretty much you put in Babylon Will Rise and it's going to come up in one of the, especially online retailers. Local bookstores can get it, but they'll have to be ordered or they have to go through their system to order it. That's kind of the missing piece of getting to a point where can actually have books in stock places. The missing piece is to really get a traditional publisher. It happens outside of it, but limited. But yeah, they can go there and they can get a copy of Babylon Will Rise on December 5th. And then and they can also snag a copy of The Body Man, Breach of Trust, Ransom Daughter. There's a few other stories out there for them. And the plan is to give you another one, give you Supreme Justice, summer of 2025.
Well, that's awesome. And then, A Tale of Two Scribes, Mondays. Are you going to be taking a break from that for the holidays? I guess season 1, as we're calling it, is wrapping up.
Yeah, and I'm not really going with seasons, but yeah, I've been going kind of hard this year between the 2 books, between travel, kids, job, writing, running a small business, all that. I kind of think it's smart to just take the month of December off. So besides, this and some podcasts for my book release, I'm not filming any new episodes till sometime early January probably. And I've got about 8 to 10 lined up here for the first part of the year. So I'll see what I'll just see what I want to do. John, circling back to what we talked about before, John's really cool about stuff. It's my show. I get to kind of do whatever I want to do.
Yeah.
If I want episodes to air, I film episodes. If I want to take a couple months off, I take a couple months off. So there's really, it really comes down to what I'm comfortable doing. But yeah, I think a break was in order. So obviously episode 40 just came out, getting really great reviews and responses and views already. Episode 41 will drop on December, 9th. I think it's 9th.
Yep.
Monday the 9th, and then that'll be the last one this year. And that one actually, I'll give you the spoiler, that one actually is I'm bringing back returning guests for that one. So we've got a bunch of heads on that one that are talking. That was a fun episode. I wanted to kind of end it with it's kind of a year-end look at some different things, basically.
Yeah, we always do that too on the Whitfield Report. We'll probably be doing like a Christmas show here shortly. If you can make it, I'll give you more details. We'd love to have you, but if you can't make it that night, we understand.
When do you film it?
Usually Wednesdays at 9:30, and we're doing an autism awareness charity.
Lovely.
This year.
And you're doing that on Christmas Day then?
No, we do that the week before Christmas.
The week before Christmas. Okay. Yeah, just reach out to me. I'll look at my schedule.
Yeah.
I'll let you know for sure.
Yeah, we don't have the date settled down yet. Once I have the date, I'll let you know.
Okay, that sounds great. Well, Sam, thank you for having me on the fifth time. Thank you for your perspective on things. I think you've got a great show that you do here. You give authors a voice, which I think is always important. Yeah, I love seeing your progress. I love seeing how you're growing and how you're reaching out and doing new things. That's a great thing.
Well, likewise, sir, and I appreciate you coming on. You're always, one person who I can always depend on to have a really in-depth, conversation with. So
Thank you.
I always appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Folks, my book, Shadows of Deception, is now available in hardcover. So go ahead and purchase that. If you need a gift before the holidays, one thing I do want to say on behalf of Eric, myself, and other people in the indie press community is don't wait until the last week of Christmas to order physical books and then DM us at the last minute asking us to, fix your Amazon orders. I had that happen last year, and, we may write the books and self-publish them, but we're not in charge of shipping or anything like that. So please do yourself a favor and order, books ahead of time. But hey, if you need last minute gift ideas, Kindle editions are always good. So
Kindles work. You can gift a Kindle ebook. So you can go out and buy 10 copies of Sam's books, and they will send you links, and you can send those 10 links out to 10 different people. So if you've already read his books, you can go buy more and give them out as gifts in ebook format.
That is true. I always forget you can gift ebooks, but I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, folks, we'll see you next episode and talk it down the road. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sam.
The right to offend is not some pesky little part of freedom of speech that we have to put up with. It is the heart and soul and lungs of freedom of speech. It is the coursing lifeblood of human progress. It is the instigator of liberty and modernity and science and understanding. What a laughing stock today's student leaders are, that they can so casually dismiss the right to be offensive without realizing that their lovely, enlightened lives are the gift of individuals who gave offense. Offensiveness is not just something we have to begrudgingly accept. Offensiveness is the motor of human progress.
Thank you for watching the Whitfield Report live on the Right to Offend Media Network. Make sure to check out Sam's books on Amazon, Audible, and Kindle. You can follow Sam on X at SamW_NGC and the Right to Offend Media Network at RTO Media. Like, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. And until next time, God bless, God save this great nation. God, freedom, legacy, in that order.